Hi, you're listening to It Happened to Me, a rare disease and medical challenges podcast. The mission of our podcast is to support you, our listeners, and to create community as you confront the toughest challenges in life. All of us will experience health hardships. The real question is how we adapt. That's the focus of It Happened to Me, which wants to help you overcome limitations and live a full and satisfying life. Drawing on their own health challenges, co-hosts Kathy Gildenhorn and Beth Glassman interview guests who share stories and research to help you succeed in the face of difficult health obstacles. It happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.
Today's episode of It Happened to Me focuses on autism in children. It's a topic that can feel overwhelming, emotional, and confusing for many families, especially at the beginning of their diagnostic journey.
We're joined by Dr. Teresa Lyons, an international autism expert, Ivy League trained scientist, and an autism parent. Dr. Lyons holds a Ph.D. from Yale and is the founder and CEO of Navigating AWEtism, a platform designed to turn complex autism science into clear, practical guidance for families.
Dr. Lyons' perspective is so powerful. She brings both rigorous scientific training and lived experience as the parent of a child with autism. She's worked with families in more than 21 countries, helping parents move from fear and confusion to confidence and clarity.
In this conversation, we'll talk about autism and what it really is, how parents can make sense of the science without being overwhelmed, and how families can focus on practice and strengths and meaningful support for their children. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Lyons.
Thank you for having me.
Thrilled to have you here. Now, Dr. Lyons, let's start at the beginning. Can you share your personal journey, both as a scientist and as a parent of a child with autism? How did those two worlds come together?
Oh boy, they collided. So I have my PhD in computational chemistry from Yale. I love chemistry. I've always loved chemistry since I was a little kid, playing around in the basement with all the different chemicals and making my own version. And then I went on to work in the pharmaceutical industry after my PhD. And I really enjoyed healthcare, right? So the whole idea of using chemistry and what I love on the molecular level to really impact someone's life. And that's really what I enjoyed doing. I worked on the R&D side in the pharmaceutical industry and then also on the business side. So understanding how doctors write prescriptions, how they're educated. And then my daughter was diagnosed with autism. And I have all this pharmaceutical knowledge. And I asked the specialist, okay, now what? Thinking, okay, I'm writing some medical guidelines and we're going to have options and we're going to do these testing. And there was none of that. So my PhD side had to step in and really get to know what is autism and then how can I help my daughter?
Wow. Now, for listeners who may be new to this topic, how do you explain autism in children in a clear, approachable way?
So autism is very difficult to describe in many ways because the diagnosis is made on observation. So there's not a MRI or a blood test.
No blood tests, nothing.
Yeah,
Isn't that
nothing.
interesting?
Nothing. It's all based on observation. So typically what happens is you get an observation from a speech therapist and an occupational therapist and a physical therapist and maybe a psych eval. And that gets all rolled up into an appointment with a developmental pediatrician or a pediatric neurologist, someone with specialty training in autism. And then they read all those reports and they observe your child and they may interact with them for a little bit. And then that's how the diagnosis is made. It's very frustrating in the sense of trying to define what is it from a medical standpoint, right? It's a medical diagnosis, but it's based on observation. And the other thing that gets challenging with autism and describing it is it's a spectrum. So you can have on
Mm.
one side of the spectrum, you can have someone who can speak, but might have difficulty having that nice natural ebb and flow of a conversation. They can dress themselves, feed themselves, cross the street, maybe have their license as they get older, maybe hold a job, or maybe that's really where things start to become very difficult. And then on the other side of the spectrum is more profound autism, which someone might not be able to speak at all. They not be able to dress themselves or feed themselves or cook food, or they might not ever be able to cross the street on their own, right? There's
Hmm.
too much body control of looking across the street and moving. So it is very complex in the sense that the diagnosis is made based on observation, and then it can look so very different.
So, doctor, could this diagnosis be subjective?
So there are times where one doctor might give an autism diagnosis and another might say no. So there is
Uh-huh.
some subjectiveness to it. You really want to get a diagnosis from someone who is reputable, who has been in the field for a long time, who really specializes in autism. So if you go to a doctor and this is all they're doing all day long, they're going to be much more of an expert than someone who does maybe 25% of the kids they see has autism. So there is some subjectivity, right? There's a
Yes.
guideline, right? So speech has
Yes.
to be impacted. There has to
Right.
be issues with stimming and kind of a sensory aspect. So there is the DSM-5 where there's criteria, but again, it is subjective in some sense because you're evaluating someone's ability to have a conversation. It's easier on one side of the spectrum when someone can't speak at all. But when
Exactly.
someone can
Exactly.
speak, then it gets more nuanced as to, okay, can they have conversations in topics that are not interesting and, eye contact, things like that. And again, that's why you want to be in front of an expert.
Yes. Well, would this explain why we have such an explosion of autism diagnosis?
So that is a question that I don't think has 100% reliable answer.
Uh-huh.
So some of the answer is the actual label of autism is broader now in the sense of, let's say,
Yes.
10 years ago, we used to
Right.
have Asperger's and autism, two separate
Two
diagnoses.
separate. Uh-huh.
And that's not the case anymore. So
Asperger's is autism?
Asperger's is autism. There's
Is
no longer
autism.
Yeah, there's no longer a separate Asperger's diagnosis.
Interesting.
Yeah, so you might have heard in the past of people who had Asperger's and then others who had autism, but now it's just one diagnosis of autism. So that change obviously is going to change how many times you hear the word autism, right?
Yeah.
Then there's also, there's questioning as to, how much genetics is really playing an impact on
Right.
this, how much our environment, so what we eat has changed, what we breathe has changed. So there's so many other contributing factors. How do we tease that out as to, is this increase due to just more awareness and just
Mm-hmm.
a broadening of the definition, or is there really an increase in the actual cases themselves? For us,
It's interesting. So much of what you're saying reminds me of what I've learned about mental health in children. And so much of it can't be firmly diagnosed in kids, especially until adulthood. And it's
Mhm.
seeing how long it stays and how much is developmental. And there's just so many questions about mental health. It just reminded me about that and wondering if there isn't a way of, at some point, identifying better indicators of the condition. And I don't
Yeah.
know if that's going to happen. Do you think it will as a
It's
scientist?
As a scientist, it's really difficult to come up with one metric one biomarker that could explain all of autism. And I think that's been the problem all along with autism. People are looking for, I want to explain everything with one thing, right? But
Right.
autism can look so different. And there's been such a hesitancy to break autism into different subtypes because the controversy comes, okay, how should we break it into a subtype, right? Because the diagnosis is made on observation. So are we going to break this into kids who can speak and kids who can't speak, right? Are we going to break this into the amount of meltdowns that someone has or sensory issues? There can be so many variables. Is what's evolving is really understanding the chemistry of autism. So understanding different aspects of health. So looking at autoimmune involvement, right? So for kids, there are some kids who have a diagnosis of autism who also have something called cerebral folate deficiency. And now that can actually be tested with a blood
That
test.
could be measured. Yes.
Yes. And so it's the overlap, right? So
Right.
the child gets the autism diagnosis and then later on finds out through doing different testing to evaluate health, okay, they have cerebral folate deficiency. Then they take the prescription that is for that. Speech increases, right? And so many of the symptoms that are associated with autism then get improved. So it's really hard to kind of delineate between autism and some of these other diagnoses that happen at the same time. But what I really would like the field to do is start to use a lot of these tests before the autism diagnosis. So start to get really granular about health on the way to an autism diagnosis and, do something like cerebral folate deficiency tests before getting an autism diagnosis.
Wow.
So, doctor, what would be early signs that a parent would see in their child that might lead to an autism diagnosis? And how might those early signs change
So a
among
very
children?
early sign with a baby, right? We're talking,
Right.
maybe
Yes,
6
yes.
months,
They,
something. And I should preface this with a reliable autism diagnosis can be made at 18 months. So that's
I
the
see.
earliest.
Wow.
Yes.
Early. Okay.
Yeah, it is early, but
That's
a
early.
reliable diagnosis can be made then. And obviously, the sooner the better. My daughter wasn't
Okay.
diagnosed till 3.5 years old, so
Uh-huh.
it it's okay if the diagnosis comes later. Some kids are diagnosed even much later. The average age is about 4. So there is that lag between when it can be made and when it actually is made. But to get back to the question of early signs,
Early
one of
signs.
one of the early signs for maybe like a 6-month-old, or we're talking little baby, right?
Yes.
Before speech enters into our mind is
Yes.
really, are they having that kind of playful back and forth with the parent and the baby, right? Like when you go, oh, you're such a cute baby. And the baby just kind of bubbles and smiles. Like it's just fun
Yes.
play. So a lot of times kids with autism, that's not present in those really
see.
early months, right? And so that's one of the more early signs that a child might have red flags, right? So we can't diagnose autism based off that,
Right.
but that would be a red flag if it seems like it's difficult to do that. Usually babies love that, right? Like you can do that with a baby in the airport.
Little
right?
tickle, little
Yeah.
tickle to the tummy or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, or even just getting close to them. They're like,
Yeah.
"Ooh,
Snuggling.
that's
Yes.
good."
Snuggle, snuggle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that
So
is
that
one of the most
lack of
early signs.
response, I see.
Yes.
That
Yes,
lack
yes,
of
yes.
response or sort of maybe facially no expression.
Correct.
Uh-huh.
Correct. Or it might seem like they're just ignoring you or they didn't
I
see
see.
you. A lot of times parents explain it different ways. Oh, they're just not interested. Oh, they woke up from a nap. They're tired.
Yes.
They're not, But if it just seems it's more difficult to have a playful interaction with this baby, that's a red flag.
So thinking about parents who get a diagnosis of autism, and what advice would you give to these parents at the early stages?
At the early stages, it's very emotional for the parents.
Yes,
So,
yes,
yeah,
I can only imagine.
Yes, right. So it's
Yeah.
it's a stressful situation because there is so much unknown, right? And sometimes you'll hear
Yes.
from doctors, oh, they'll grow out of it. So
Mm.
parents can start to even almost question their own intuition because they might have that feeling from 6 months, like, something's not right. But they might be getting told from different people, every child develops differently. And so there is a lot of emotions that go into this. So you hope, okay, it's not autism, but then you have to do your due diligence. And that takes a lot of energy and effort to make these appointments, to get all the
Yes.
different
Yeah.
assessments done. There's a lot of energy that goes into this in addition to all the stress and the worrying. So when you get that autism diagnosis, many parents feel a sense of relief, like, okay, we at least have a label, we kind of know what we're dealing with.
What's going
I see.
But then you have all the emotions of like grief, right? Because now your
right?
Mhm.
parenting experience is going to be completely different. You have
Yes.
grieving a childhood that your child might not have, right? That you don't know how this is going to go. And so then there might become anger and frustration. And then the
Mm.
child might not be sleeping, right? So now you're going to
Hmm.
start to deal with different symptoms. And usually, as a child gets older, you're going to have different symptoms become more pronounced. And so then a lot of things become very, very difficult. But the
Mm.
important thing to know as a parent is there's two things. One is to go through those emotions. You can't stop them.
Mm.
You can't suppress them. You can try and ignore them for a little bit, but they will come up and usually at the wrong
Right.
time. So it's important to have those emotions and to experience them, but to not stay stuck. So you don't want to
Mm.
stay in anger, right? You don't
Right.
want to stay in grieving, right? There's opportunities, but it's going to be different. So once you come to that point of, okay, this is going to look a little different, let me figure this out. And then the second thing for parents really to know is that an autism diagnosis is not lifelong for everybody. There's a lot of research over the years that show a small percentage of kids with autism don't retain their diagnosis, meaning they don't need OT, they don't need
They grow out of it,
yeah, well,
basically.
they grow out of it, but usually a lot of involvement from the parents.
It's
Wow.
going to take a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, 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 yes. Um,
Wow.
but it's important. So when my daughter was diagnosed back in 2013, that number was 10%. And now that number is 37%.
Whoa. That's a wonder. Is it because scientists are looking for it, or is it because it's actually happening more?
I think it's because it's actually happening more. Because scientists have always done a reassessment. So usually a child's diagnosed if they're under the age of 8, around the age of 8, you have to do that assessment again. And
Right.
then a lot of times later in life, around 18 or so, an assessment is usually done again. But more parents are aware and are asking better medical questions, right? So
Hmm.
something like cerebral folate. You know, 30 years ago, that was not discussed. There wasn't a blood test. There was no way to even quantify that. But
Right.
now there is. And with social media, certain topics are getting spread much faster. So that's a great aspect so that parents can really ask those medical questions. And when you address different medical issues, right, then that allows the child different opportunities in life, right? So if a child's not
Absolutely.
speaking, then they're speaking, then school becomes different, and then they could tell you, "Hey, I have a headache," and then you could go to the doctor and say, "Hey, we've got headache," right? So there's so much that involves synergy. So when you really make improvements in one area, you can see
It can,
improvements.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as a scientist, how do you help families separate evidence based information from misinformation? And when it comes to autism, generally, there's so much information, legitimate information and misinformation. How do you differentiate?
Sure. So we can start with a scientific fact, scientific study that was done looking at like the 100 or so top popular videos on autism on TikTok. And
Mm.
so the scientists found that 70% of the most popular videos on TikTok relating to autism were either wrong or overgeneralized. So
Whoa.
yes, yes. It's important
Uh,
for parents to just at least know that. I can use TikTok, I can use social media for ideas, but I shouldn't use it as, information to make a decision on, right? So that's kind of like the idea generation. Cerebral folate deficiency. Oh, okay.
Is there a support group where parents can share this kind of valuable information with each other?
There are different ones, and what happens is that you have different groups depending upon different issues with the children. Right?
Right.
So some kids who are speaking and some are not, and you'll have a whole variety of different support groups. So it is difficult, I think, for information to uniformly be distributed.
That
Um,
would be so helpful, I think, rather than just categorizing it by the symptoms your child is manifesting, really being able to go, once you're in this basic world and community, how do you go ahead and decipher information?
yeah. Well, what I teach parents is you can consume this information, right? We're all going to be on social media. We're all going to see different videos, right? But you have to have this lens of, is that relevant for my child? And that's really how you can start to discern, okay, what should I really focus on and what should I not? So you might see a video and it might be about constipation, and you're thinking, okay, my child doesn't have constipation as an issue. So it's great that it's there, but it's not something for us to focus on. A lot
Right.
of times
That
parents
makes
hear
sense.
how something was beneficial and they're like, oh, let me just try it. Even if it's not necessarily targeted towards whatever issues their child has. So it's
Got
really
you.
important for parents to have that focus, that
The-
lens of,
well, speaking of that focus, many parents, I'm sure, feel pressure to do everything at once. And how do you help families prioritize what actually matters most, particularly to their child?
yeah. So I usually recommend parents create a list of the top 3 things related to autism that is preventing their child from living the life they want, right? So
Okay.
for some, it might be speech. For some, it might be meltdowns. For some, it might be picky eating. For some,
mm,
it might be handwriting, right? So it's really just to get clear on what really
mm,
is meaningful for this child and also for family life, right?
mm.
So sometimes when we go to experts and specialists and therapists, they start talking about what they know most about, but maybe that's not going to improve our family life. So we as the parent really have to drive and be the leader in saying, this is what's important for my child and our family. And what can you do to really help with that? And if that person can't address whatever those top 3 are, then that's not someone you want to work with at that time.
Doctor, I have a friend whose child was diagnosed with autism at a young age. And I have to say, this is why I asked about the subjectivity. He is living on his own. He
Mhm.
has a job. He went through school. And I really believe that if the parents had not taken no for an answer, that if they hadn't so really just said, we're going to do everything we can do to
Mhm.
support our child, this would not be this achieving adult that he is today.
Wow.
I so I guess I want to say that to parents that there is hope. There's a lot that your child can do, and that's what I wanted to ask you about this one size fits all as far as dealing with autism and how to best support our children, which of course as parents, that's what our goal is, to support all our children so that they lead their best life.
Yeah. And so what you talk about is 100% possible. And it's not necessarily that the autism diagnosis was wrong at that time. So
Uh-huh.
that child received an autism diagnosis. The parents, like you said, were adamant and were like, "Whoa, we don't want our child to be limited." And
Right.
then it was, okay, what does this child need? And it probably took several years, right? And
Yes.
determination and always saying, okay, what do they need now? What do they need now? So having that
Right.
focus, resolving it, and then moving on to the next focus. And that's really how you get that 10% or 37%.
Seven.
Those
Mhm.
are the not magic, and I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's possible, and that's what it's really important for parents to know.
Well, it's so important for parents to be the active tool that Beth
Proactive.
is describing.
Yes.
Is how
Re-
much would
Proactive.
you say is luck of the draw? And how much is this proactive behavior on the part of the support of the child?
I think it has to go two ways. So I think the parent has to be proactive,
Okay.
100%, but I
Mhm.
Yes.
also think the relationship between the parent and the child has to be collaborative in a way. Because I've seen many times when parents are very proactive, maybe a little
Mhm.
too proactive, and the child
Right.
feels it, and then they start to shut down
Rebel.
or disengage,
Yes.
rebel.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Um, so there is the parent needing to be proactive, but then the child, and I don't want to put the blame on the child, how the child has to be
Right.
willing, but the relationship between the parent and the child has to be such that the child's trusting the parent and,
Mm.
either taking supplements or saying, hey, we're going to go to this therapist and we're going to do this and this is the reason why, and it's presented in a way that seems fun and beneficial for the
Right.
child.
They
Yes.
need to buy into it.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 And that's hard to do because,
Yes.
right? Remember, you have all this stress. You may have other
Yes.
children. You have a spouse. You
Yes.
have a job. You have a home to care for, right? You got to cook
Yes.
food. You got to grocery shop. You got
Yes.
laundry.
Yes. You have
There's,
life. Yes.
yes.
Life. Life
So
filling.
it is hard
Yes.
to do. It is definitely not the easiest of things to do.
No. So what role do strengths and interests play in the development of a child?
Sure. So that's when you're growing that child to step into new skills or to do new
Mhm.
things. When you can use their strengths or their interest, it makes it so much easier. So you never want the
Mm.
child to feel like they're wrong or you're fixing them because there's something, fundamentally wrong with who they are. So it's
Mm.
always leaning into, oh, what does my child like to do? So like
Mhm.
with different therapies, it's always okay, what would be interesting? Do we need to teach socialization? Okay, let's do a game. And what kind of game should we do? Oh, something related to trains because the child really loves trains, right?
Mhm.
This is how you create that collaboration rather than a therapist who's like, all right, I need to teach socialization. All right, we're just going to do face card memorization, right? Like,
Mm.
that's no fun. Who wants to do that?
No. Right. A music therapy or art
Yes.
therapy. Yes.
Yeah. There's
Yes.
so much where you can use their interest as the jumping off point so that their learning becomes more intrinsic. So they're leaning into it. They're wanting to start learning and doing different things based upon enjoyment for them, not based upon, okay, I'll give you 10 minutes on an iPad if you do XYZ,
Right.
right? That's not going to go very far in life.
That's terrific advice. Now, you've worked with families across many cultures and countries. And what universal challenges do you find the parents of autistic children face?
Universally, it's just hard. Like
Mm.
this makes autism makes everything much more difficult. In some countries, there's more of a stigma than
Hmm.
others. So in the US, I think the stigma definitely has significantly decreased, although it's still there. And there are still parents who don't take their child out in public because, they might get stares or looks or comments or things
Oh,
like that.
that's sad.
Um, yeah, it
Yeah.
happens a lot more in other countries, and that definitely then becomes a higher concern of different parents when stigma is still quite high in their country. So then it just plays on emotions. Every parent feels guilty. I feel like, what did I do wrong? I know I went through
Mm.
all of that and I thought I was doing everything right and maybe I didn't do this and I should have done that. And at the time I didn't know any better, so there really wasn't anything more for me to do, but I certainly felt those emotions.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So anywhere in the world, parents definitely have those emotions. And it's just, again, important not to stay stuck in them, because then you can't really make the progress that could be possible for your child if you're just stuck in these emotions.
Well, how can parents become more effective advocates for their child within schools and the healthcare system?
Okay, so for healthcare,
That's a loaded
this is
question, I'm sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So I'll answer healthcare first, but then school, because both are very important. Healthcare, what I have found is it's really important, again, for parents to get what are the top 3 things that matter most for this child. And then before they have a doctor's appointment or a specialist appointment, to really create some type of an agenda and to write those out, write out their questions, and send that to the doctor the day before, so that the doctor, good doctors will, at the end of their day, they'll, 5 o'clock or so, they'll look at, okay, what do I have tomorrow? What should I be thinking about to get me prepared for tomorrow? Many doctors, that's the way they think, and the good ones definitely. So if you can send over an agenda to them as to what is meaningful, right? Maybe the 3 topics, maybe a few questions. This way they can start thinking about it. And especially the more difficult the question, the more detailed the question, you want to give them time to think about an answer. And then this is how you get really good healthcare, by working with a doctor who is prepared and who
Right.
also understands, like, whoa, this parent is really prepared. Okay, I better bring my A game, right? You create a good team that way. And then for schools is it's definitely a bit more difficult, because there could be many different people. So you might have a speech therapist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, a teacher, a special ed teacher, a teaching assistant, right? So the team gets
Yeah.
to be bigger, but really collaboration is what helps, especially in a large team environment like that. So, saying things that you're observing, asking, okay, how can we address this? Instead of going in there and just complaining, telling them they're not doing a good job, right? You want to come with a solution, or at least to propose, so that they can really start to think on their own. Because many teachers and therapists, their caseload is just to the max. And so they don't have that time to really think creatively or go for additional trainings, or, so the easier that you can make their job by saying, okay, this is what some of the problem is from feedback from you. What if we try this? What if we try that? And you can collaboratively come to some type of answer to try. But it's really hard to just be like, okay, you shouldn't be doing that. My child is not learning. That's not the way to really move the needle.
Again, parents really have to be active. They
Yes.
really have to be
So
on
active.
top of, they have to continually do research
And they
to
have to,
really help providers, to help the school personnel.
yes. Yes, yes, yes. And so that's part of stepping into what an autism parent is. So you're going to have to email the school team maybe once a week, twice a week, every week, right? So you might be like, I don't want to be doing this. I shouldn't have to do this. That is true. But if you want your child to get what they need, this is
You need
the
to do it.
management, yeah, and the advocacy that you need to do.
So, doctor, let's discuss what are some of the myths or misconceptions around autism?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is when a child with autism, regardless of where on the spectrum they are, when it looks like they're not listening, that they're not listening. I have found, regardless of where they are on the spectrum, even if a child looks like they're not listening, and even if a child looks like they can't learn at that level, most times it's not accurately reflected because they're not able to communicate. And that's really the misconception, that comprehension and communication, are equal. Many times kids are comprehending at grade level work or even higher, but the difficulty comes in expressing it, or the difficulty comes in sitting at a chair for, like 45 minutes and expecting everybody's body to listen the same way. So that, I would say, is one of the largest misconceptions.
So they are, in fact, listening or taking in the
Yes.
information, but it wouldn't appear to us to be in a way that we would assume it to be so. So
Right.
they may be squirmy, but they're listening.
Right. So I
Is
would
that
say
what you mean? That they're listening, but it just is in a form that we wouldn't recognize.
They're listening their way.
Yes.
correct. So I learned this lesson in many different ways, but one that I have on my YouTube channel is of kids with profound autism who are using something called spelling to communicate. So it's a letter board and they use gross motor skills to type out words. Eventually they get onto the keyboard, some of the kids, some not. And I interviewed several of them and I learned by doing that. And they explained this. So there was one time where there was a kid who was vocal stimming. So he was going, "Wah, wah," like making all these kind of
Yeah.
noise. It was difficult for me to even think and
Mm.
to formulate my question, right? So I say the question, and without missing anything, he starts, spelling out an answer. And so then I stopped and I was like, listen, you're making so much noise, I couldn't even think. But what I saw was it was not impacting you at all. Like you still
Mm.
heard me, you still answered.
Right.
There was no like pause. I didn't need to repeat myself or anything like that. And he explained to me that sometimes my mouth is just going, but I've learned to just ignore it because it's
Oh
not
my.
something I
Oh,
can control. It's
Huh.
just noise. So I've learned to just kind of,
so something we can learn from him in
yes.
terms of communication.
Yeah. So and that's what I've learned that in many different ways. Then there's another example. I worked with parents whose child had cerebral folate deficiency
Okay.
and was not able to speak. So this child was not speaking at all and we've did quite a few things, but after 6 months then the child was speaking 4 languages.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
The thing is, this child in 6 months did not learn 4 languages. He was learning all along. He was listening, he was comprehending, right? He's learning these different languages.
Just wasn't vocalizing.
He didn't have the ability to express it.
Yeah.
So then
Mm.
once we resolved what the health issues were and he was able to start speaking, then he was able to show, "Hey, I
The
know."
floodgates opened. Yeah.
Yes. So the kids are listening, they're learning. Just a lot of times the communication piece is preventing what we would need to see so that we could say, oh, we know they're learning, right?
Right.
So that many times takes a lot longer to catch up.
So,
Fascinating.
doctor, how do you, in dealing with families, we all want to be hopeful and optimistic, but how do you balance that hope and optimism against reality for families?
Sure. So, as a scientist, I put hope into, I don't know, logic, I guess. I gotta have
Huh?
something logical first, and then like hope naturally evolves. So, for parents, they want to be hopeful. You want to
Yes.
use quality science and data to guide that hope. So you don't want to just start doing things randomly and hope that it works. So if a parent ever says something like, I don't know if it works, but I hope it does, they should stop and say, is this something I really want to be doing? Right?
Mm.
You want to ground that hope in a blood test, a urine test, a stool test, something that would give you an idea of this is something that's important for my child to focus on. Like take vitamin D, for example.
Mhm.
Child is having trouble sleeping, right? A parent could say, oh, I hope we can find something. I hope they just start falling asleep. I hope all these different things, right? But one of the first steps would be, all right, let's do a vitamin D. It's a blood test, not anyone's favorite, but let's do a blood test to see vitamin D. A lot of times when vitamin D is low, kids have trouble falling asleep. So it's
Mm.
like, all right, let's start using some basic health metrics to understand what issues there are. And vitamin D, if someone's not supplementing with it, is going to be low. We all know
Mhm.
that, autism or not. And so then it's like, all right, let's work on getting vitamin D to be in the optimal range. Okay, I
Mm.
don't have to hope now on
Mhm.
anything. Now it's just, all right, let's get vitamin D to the levels that it should be. And
Practical
let's
things you could do.
Yeah, but then let's see what
based on
changes.
science. Yeah,
Yes, based on science.
Continuing on this practical level, what steps can parents take at home to support communication, emotional regulation, or daily routines?
Emotional regulation is definitely a challenge because our children feed off of our emotional regulation. And if they're sleeping, we're not sleeping, and then we're grouchy, and then they're grouchy, and then we're
Yeah.
grouchy back, and it can get really, really difficult. So it is hard, but it is necessary for a parent to remain as much as possible in that calm and grounded state, regardless of all the things that are happening.
That are going on around them. Yeah.
It's definitely hard.
And how do you encourage parents to care for their own mental health while
Mm,
they're supporting a child with autism?
So this is science that is starting to evolve. It turns out that a parent of a child with autism and emotional dysregulation, their risk for being diagnosed with PTSD
mm,
increases about 20 to 30%.
wow.
Wow.
That is just from raising a child with autism.
Yeah.
So the stresses that a parent has are real. And
Hmm.
it's important for parents to acknowledge that and
Yeah.
to seek help when they need, and to know that
Yes.
this is something that is not wrong with me. It's not that I'm a failure or that I'm weak, but there's a lot that is going on. Some of these autism meltdowns are very traumatic for everybody, for the
Yeah.
child, for the parents, for anyone who's watching it. So for a parent's mental health, it's really important for them to know what is possible, but then also to understand that a PTSD diagnosis itself does not have to be lifelong. So there was some great research just recently. It was a small clinical trial. Like I said, this is just beginning.
Right. Just happening.
So there was 7 parents, 5 moms, 2 dads that had PTSD that was diagnosed as a direct result of the child with autism. They did EMDR, and within 5 to 7 sessions of
I'm sorry, doctor. What is
Busy
ER?
FDR.
so it's eye movement desensitization. So it's you could call it the gold standard for PTSD treatments. What it is basically is you're working with a therapist and you're moving your eyes in a very specific way, and it
Oh,
mimics REM sleep. So REM
oh,
sleep helps us process all these emotions and all these interactions we've had through the day and the science that it's built on. So parents do, in this clinical study, they did 5 to 7 sessions of about an hour. So, right, small time investment. We're not talking years here. We're talking 5 to 7 appointments. And they were able to lose their PTSD diagnosis.
That's incredible.
oh,
Well, to help
huh.
our audience, what type of doctor, who do you seek out if there's a question about PTSD and your mental health?
Yeah, so a therapist
But a
usually.
general psychiatrist, psychologist, or is it someone that deals in more specialized fields?
Typically more specialized. So I would suggest looking for someone that is trauma informed.
Okay.
They have on, their website or, their interests. So
Mm,
a trauma informed therapist would be the person to go to. And then there are people who specialize only in EMDR. So if that is something that they want to use as a technique, usually the people who are giving the EMDR, they're very specialized and they're not interacting with a lot of patients and helping them sort out what therapies they want to do. So
Right.
a lot of times you would find a trauma-informed therapist, talk it out. Maybe that's who would give you the diagnosis.
Is there a website that our audience could go to that might give them some ideas as to how to proceed or what to do? Is there a general support group for parents that might need some sort of help with EMDR and just PTSD
Yeah, I
treatment?
haven't found one specifically for autism, but maybe in the future for sure. I think it would be good for if a parent has that. So PTSD, there's usually problems with sleep. So it's kind of
Mm.
hard to shut the brain off. There might be an ability, like if you look at your phone, then you kind of go into crisis mode because you're waiting for the next call, the next problem relating to your child, specifically like meltdowns or this is suicide attempts. So these are very stressful situations. So if a parent recognizes that in themselves, then that's when they should start to look at working with a trauma-informed therapist.
So, doctor, I want to address the elephant in the room. As a scientist, do you believe there's a relationship between vaccines and autism?
That is a very good question. And it's one of those things where I think it's hard to say that vaccines would contribute to everybody's autism diagnosis. And it's also hard to say that vaccines did not contribute to some, right? So, especially when
Hmm.
we're talking about the immune system involvement, that's what vaccines do, right? It provokes our immune system. So, there is legitimate concerns, right? So, if a parent is concerned about vaccines, there are definitely things that they can do. They can space out the vaccines. Doctors are willing to do that. You can also make sure your baby is healthy, right? So you wouldn't want to give a vaccine when a child has a cold. But sometimes that's just what happens. So vaccines is something that is personal as to different choices that parents make. I have worked with parents whose kids were not vaccinated and they had an autism diagnosis, which is
Hmm.
why I say autism can't be described more than likely as a cause by one thing universally, right? So
Mhm.
that's the difficulty in some aspects of this. Now, vaccines do cause injury. That's why our government has a vaccine injury program that has paid out millions of dollars to parents whose kids have sustained injury from vaccines. So that is 100% legitimate. But again, it's finding that balance and really understanding your child before doing anything medical.
Hmm. That makes sense.
Hmm. Hmm. So, before we wrap up, I wondered if you could talk directly to parents and give them some maybe encouragement or hope. All I can say is, doctor, if you are such a soothing, you really make it very understandable. And I wondered if you could leave our listening audience with your words of wisdom.
Sure. So, for a parent who is listening to this and their child has autism,
Yes.
I know they are a very loving parent who probably
Uh-huh.
feels they're failing, probably feels they're not
Oh,
doing good enough for their child.
oh,
And just the fact that they're listening to this and searching for answers tells me they're a great parent.
Oh,
that's
it's a
Many times,
great.
beautiful thought. Thank you. That's
yeah.
beautiful.
And they might not have heard that in a long time, but they are a great parent. And um, there's there's many things out there that can help. But if they just take a pause,
And
take a
pat
breath,
themselves on the back.
yes, and
Appreciate what they're
yes,
doing. Yeah.
appreciate. And that's the place where you want to make decisions from, not from a place of just blaming yourself for everything.
Doctor, I have to thank you so much for being a guest today. You've really taken us through every possible angle of autism. And it's not an easy subject, it is emotionally charged, but I think you helped us understand that it's no one's fault and there are ways you can help your child, but you also must help yourself. It's such a multifaceted subject, and you laid it out in such a coherent way. And I want to thank you so much for helping us understand this childhood illness.
Thank you
Pleasure.
so much for being on It Happened to Me today. And I just wanted to mention to our audience that we will provide in the show notes as many links to resources, to ideas you have, to your YouTube page, to any additional resources that might be available that could help our audience.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's been quite a show. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of It Happened to Me. We encourage you to learn more at ithappenedtomepod.com. Please use the contact form on our website to submit your guest suggestions, comments, questions, ideas, and feedback for the show. You can also email us directly at ithappenedtomepod@gmail.com. We would really appreciate it if you can leave us a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app like Apple or Spotify. This helps others in the rare disease and medical challenge community find us. It Happened to Me is created and hosted by Kathy Gillenhorn and Beth Glassman. I'm Keir Deneen from DNA Today, and I serve as our executive producer and marketing lead. Amanda Andrioli is our associate producer. Ashlyn Anokian is our graphic designer. And remember, it happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.